Manager humiliates janitor without knowing she was the company owner's mother. Betty Johnson held the broomstick tightly as her heart raced with every cruel word that came out of the manager's mouth. At 68 years old, she never imagined she'd endure such humiliation, but there was a very specific reason she was there. "Look at this incompetent woman," shouted Richard Peterson, the manager, to all the employees passing through the hallway. 68 years old and can't even clean a floor properly. She should have retired ages ago." Betty lowered her eyes and kept scrubbing the floor, but every word burned into her memory. What Richard didn't know was that she had infiltrated her own son Michael's company to find out why so many employees kept quitting. The information had reached her through worried comments from acquaintances who worked there. "Ma'am, are you deaf?" Richard slammed his fist against the wall. "I'm talking to you." "I'm sorry, sir," Betty murmured, keeping her voice shaky as she had practiced. "I'm doing my best." "Your best?" He laughed cruelly. "This is a serious company, not a nursing home. If you can't keep up, quit." The other employees walked past, avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the scene. Betty noticed how they all seemed to tiptoe around, always on edge. It confirmed her suspicions that something was very wrong in the company Michael had built with such care. Betty Johnson had raised Michael alone after her husband abandoned them when the boy was just 5 years old. She had worked as a seamstress, a laundress, a cake seller, anything to ensure her son could study and have a better future. Watching Michael graduate in business and start his own company had been the proudest moment of her life. "And wipe that pitiful look off your face," Richard continued. "No one here feels sorry for lazy people." "Yes, sir," Betty replied, swallowing the urge to tell him exactly what she thought. When Richard finally walked away, a young employee discreetly approached Betty. It was Ashley, one of the receptionists, who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. "Don't pay him any mind, Mrs. Johnson," Ashley whispered. "He treats everyone like that." "Everyone?" Betty asked, feigning innocence. "Everyone," Ashley confirmed, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Especially the women. He's a very difficult man to deal with." At that moment, Betty began to grasp the scale of the problem. It wasn't just poor management or work stress. There was something more systematic happening here. Something poisoning the environment Michael had built with so much love. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers. Now, back to the story. During lunch break, Betty went to the employee lounge to eat the simple sandwich she'd brought from home. She sat alone in a corner, listening to the hushed conversations around her. It was striking how people spoke in whispers, always looking over their shoulders, as if afraid of being overheard. "Did you hear what happened to Jennifer?" one employee whispered to another. "What happened?" her co-worker asked. "Richard fired her because she questioned the schedule change, said she was being rebellious." Betty listened closely. Jennifer was a name she'd heard Michael mention a few times, always positively. She was one of the company's most experienced and competent employees. "But she'd been here for 6 years, the second employee exclaimed. "Exactly, and she wasn't the first. Kevin left last week too, remember?" "Oh, right, the accountant. He was so dedicated." Betty felt her stomach tighten. Michael had complete trust in Richard and had given him free rein to manage the company's operations while he focused on expanding the business. Apparently, that trust was being betrayed in a terrible way. After lunch, Betty was cleaning the restrooms when she found papers thrown in the trash. On impulse, she picked them up and discreetly tucked them into her uniform pocket. Later, in the locker room, she examined the documents and was shocked by what she saw. They were spreadsheets listing employees marked for termination, with notes like "asks too many questions," "not submissive," and "could cause trouble." "What are you doing here?" Richard's voice startled her. Betty was in the locker room, but he had entered without knocking. She quickly hid the papers. "I'm changing to leave, sir." "And those papers in your hand?" "What papers, sir?" Betty pretended to be confused. Richard stepped closer, completely invading her personal space. "Don't play games with me, old lady. I know you were digging through the trash. That's not a cleaner's job." I'm sorry, sir. I saw some papers lying around and thought they might be important. Let me make one thing clear. He pointed his finger in her face. You're here to clean and nothing else. If I find out you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, you'll be out on the street before you know what hit you. That night, Betty came home with a heavy heart. She lived in a modest house in South Bronx, on the outskirts of New York City, the same neighborhood where she had raised Michael. The house still held photos of her son at every stage of his life: graduation, his first job, the opening of his company. She picked up the phone to call Michael, but hesitated. He was traveling to Washington, D.C., trying to close an important deal with a tech company. She didn't want to worry him with suspicions she couldn't yet fully prove. She decided she needed more evidence before talking to her son. Michael had worked so hard to build that company, and she couldn't just come to him with accusations without being absolutely sure of what was happening. The next day, Betty arrived at work early, determined to understand the situation better. She began observing Richard's behavior patterns. She noticed he treated male employees differently from the women, and the younger, prettier female employees were the special targets of his inappropriate attention. "Ashley, come here," Richard called out that morning. Betty was cleaning nearby and could hear the conversation. "Yes, Mr. Peterson? This report has some errors. Let's review it together in my office." "But I can fix it right here, sir. It's just a few numbers." "I said in my office." His voice hardened. "Unless you have a problem taking direction from your superior." Ashley looked around, clearly uncomfortable, but had no choice but to follow Richard to his office. Betty kept cleaning, but stayed alert. 15 minutes later, Ashley came out with red eyes and a wrinkled blouse. That confirmed Betty's worst suspicions. Richard wasn't just being a tough boss. He was abusing his power in a way that went far beyond poor management. During lunch, Betty carefully approached Ashley. "Are you okay, dear?" Ashley looked at her in surprise. "Why do you ask, Mrs. Johnson? You seem upset. Sometimes talking helps." Ashley hesitated, glanced around, and then sighed. "Mrs. Johnson, can I ask you something? Do you have children?" "I have a son." "And if someone did bad things to him at work, would you want to know?" Betty's heart clenched. "Of course I would, dear. Why?" "It's just—" Ashley lowered her voice even further. "There are things happening here that aren't right, but if I speak up, I'll lose my job. And I need to work." "What kind of things?" Ashley looked around again and leaned in closer. "Mr. Richard. He does things a boss shouldn't do. And if we complain, he finds a way to fire us." "What do you mean things a boss shouldn't do?" "He touches where he shouldn't, says inappropriate things, and he always makes it clear that if we don't accept it, we can look for another job." Betty felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. She took a deep breath to control herself and not break her cover. "And other employees go through this too?" "Several. Jennifer was fired because she threatened to tell the company owner. Richard said she was lying and that she was a problematic employee." At that moment, Betty understood why so many employees were quitting. They weren't quitting. They were running from an unbearable situation. And the worst part was that Michael knew nothing because he trusted Richard completely. "Can I ask why you want to know these things?" Ashley questioned. Betty thought quickly. "Because I have grandkids your age, and no girl should have to go through this in silence." "Thank you, Mrs. Betty." Ashley smiled for the first time since Betty had met her. "It's good to know someone cares." That afternoon, Betty made a risky decision. When she went to clean Richard's office, she discreetly turned on the recorder on the phone she'd bought specifically for this mission. She knew it was a huge risk, but she needed concrete proof. "Hey, cleaner," Richard called out while on the phone. "Can you stop making noise? I'm on an important call." Betty softened the sound of her broom but stayed close enough to hear. "No, don't worry," Richard was saying on the phone. "Michael's traveling all the time now. He doesn't even know what's happening here. I handle everything." "Exactly. He trusts me completely." Betty's heart raced. That conversation seemed to confirm Richard was deliberately hiding things from Michael. "Of course I can approve the payment. Michael gave me power of attorney for all financial decisions." $300,000? "Don't worry, I'll process it tomorrow." $300,000? What could such a large amount be for? Betty knew Michael was very careful with the company's finances and always personally reviewed expenses over $50,000. "Mrs. Cleaner," Richard hung up and turned to her. "How many times do I have to tell you to watch the noise?" "Sorry, sir, I'm almost done here." "And that towel on the floor, aren't you going to pick it up?" Betty looked around. There was no towel on the floor. "Where, sir?" "There." He pointed to an empty corner. "Are you going blind as well as deaf?" Betty realized he was just looking for reasons to humiliate her. She walked to the corner he'd pointed to and pretended to pick something up. "Now go clean the executive bathroom, and this time do it right. Yesterday it was disgusting." Betty knew she'd cleaned that bathroom perfectly the day before, but she said nothing. She gathered her supplies and headed to the executive bathroom. As she cleaned, she reflected on everything she'd uncovered over the past few days. Richard wasn't just being an abusive boss, he was systematically destroying the company Michael had built, both in terms of its people and its finances. Employees were being humiliated and harassed. The best professionals were being fired for questioning his behavior, and now it seemed he was also making suspicious financial moves. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Betty decided she needed to expand her investigation. She arrived early the next day and, taking advantage of being the first one there, managed to access the reception computers. Ashley had forgotten to log out the day before, and Betty was able to pull up some company documents. What she saw alarmed her even more. There were contracts with companies she had never heard Michael mention, payments to suppliers with strange names, and expenses that seemed absurdly inflated. A cleaning contract, for example, cost 3 times more than the market rate. "What are you doing there?" Richard's voice made her jump. Betty quickly closed the screen and stood up. "I was cleaning the desk, sir. The girl left the computer on." "And why were you looking at the screen?" "I wasn't looking, sir. I was wiping it down and the screen turned on." Richard walked over and checked the computer. Luckily, Betty had closed everything before he got there. "Listen carefully, janitor," he whispered threateningly. "If I find out you've been messing with computers, you'll be out of here and straight to the police station. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "I'm sorry. And don't give me that excuse about not knowing how to use a computer. These days, even homeless people have cell phones." Betty lowered her head, pretending to be intimidated, but inside she was boiling with anger. How could Michael have trusted his company to a man like that? Over the following days, Betty intensified her observations. She wrote everything down in a small notebook hidden in her bag. Times of the abuses, names of the victims, suspicious phone calls, anything that could serve as evidence. One day, while cleaning near the meeting room, she heard Richard talking to someone about adjusting reports so Michael wouldn't suspect anything. Apparently, they were fudging the numbers to hide irregular expenses. "Michael is very naive," Richard was saying. "He trusts me completely. As long as the reports match, he doesn't even question them." "What if he decides to audit the company?" asked the other voice. "It won't happen. He's too focused on expansion. He leaves all the internal operations to me." Betty felt the urge to storm into the room and confront Richard right then, but she knew it would ruin her entire investigation. She needed to be patient and gather all the evidence before acting. The situation grew even tenser when a new employee was hired. It was Emma, a 22-year-old woman fresh out of marketing school. On her very first day, Betty noticed Richard had his eyes on her. "Emma, come here," Richard called in the afternoon. "I want to explain how things work around here." Betty was cleaning nearby and saw the discomfort on Emma's face when Richard placed his hand on her shoulder inappropriately. "Here, we're like a family," Richard said, "and I personally look after every employee, especially the more special ones." Emma tried to step back discreetly, but Richard kept invading her personal space. "Tomorrow, you'll be in charge of the new project presentation. It's a big responsibility for someone so young. I hope you know how to show gratitude for opportunities." "Of course, Mr. Richard. I'll give it my all." "Great. And remember, if you need anything at all, you can come to me. My door is always open for you." The tone of his voice made it clear He wasn't just talking about work. Betty saw Emma swallow hard and nod, clearly unsure how to react. That night, Betty called Michael again, but he was in an important meeting and couldn't answer. She left a message asking him to call when he could without giving details. The next day, the situation with Emma got worse. Richard called her into his office 3 times, always with different excuses. Betty could see the young woman leaving each meeting increasingly shaken. "Mrs. Johnson," Emma approached her during lunch. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear. Have you worked here long?" "A few weeks." "And have you seen other employees going through difficult situations with the manager?" Betty looked into the young woman's eyes and saw the same fear she had seen in Ashley and the others. "Why do you ask?" "It's just, he's making me offers that aren't appropriate. And when I try to keep my distance, he gets angry and says I might be missing big opportunities." "What kind of offers?" Emma hesitated, glanced around and sighed. "He said if I were more cooperative with him, he could promote me quickly. And he made it very clear what cooperative means." Betty felt her blood boil. That girl was the same age Michael would have been if he were a woman. How dare Richard blackmail a young woman like that? "And if you refuse?" "He's already hinted he could find reasons to fire me, said I'm still on probation and any adjustment issues could mean the end of my contract." At that moment, Betty made a decision. She couldn't wait any longer to act. This situation was hurting innocent people every day, it continued. "Emma, can I give you some advice?" "Of course. Write everything down. Dates, times, exactly what he said. And if possible, try to record the conversations." "But what if he finds out?" "It's risky, I know. But sometimes you have to protect yourself, and don't agree to be alone with him anywhere." "You seem familiar with these situations." "Unfortunately, I am. And I know men like him only stop when they're confronted with proof of what they've done." That afternoon, Betty went to the company's accounting office under the pretense of cleaning. She managed to see some reports on the accountant's desk and discreetly took photos with her phone. The numbers didn't match what she'd seen on the computers days earlier. It was becoming clear Richard was manipulating financial records on 2 fronts, inflating expenses to embezzle money and hiding these manipulations from Michael with fake reports. "Hey, cleaner!" Richard appeared at the accounting office door. "What are you doing here?" "Cleaning, sir." "Cleaning what?" "There's only desks and computers here." "The floor, sir," and wiping down the tables. "No need to clean here today. Go clean the reception area." Betty knew he'd come because he'd seen her in the accounting office. He was growing more suspicious of her activities. In the following days, Richard intensified his harassment of Betty. He created impossible tasks, set absurd deadlines, and complained about everything she did, no matter how well it was done. "This window is still dirty," he'd shout, even when the window was spotless. "This floor is a disgrace," he'd complain, even right after Betty had just finished mopping. "You're the most incompetent cleaner I've ever seen," he'd say in front of other employees. Betty realized he was trying to force her to quit. He probably suspected she was seeing or hearing too much. One day, the situation reached its limit. Richard called Betty into his office and closed the door. "Sit down," he pointed to a chair. "We need to talk." "Yes, sir." "You've been here a few weeks, but it seems you're not adjusting well to the job." "How so, sir?" "Several people have complained about your cleaning, and I've noticed you've been very distracted." Betty knew he was lying. No one had complained about her cleaning, quite the opposite. "I'm sorry, sir, I'll try harder." "I don't think it's about trying. Maybe you're just too old for this kind of work." "I need this job, sir." "Everyone needs to work. But not everyone is suited for every job." Richard stood up and began pacing around the table, invading Betty's personal space in an intimidating way. "There's something else that worries me. You've been asking the employees too many questions. That's none of your business." "What questions, sir?" "Don't play dumb with me. I know you've been talking to Ashley and Emma about things that don't concern you." "I only talk about work, sir." "Liar!" He slammed his fist on the table. "You're filling the girls' heads with nonsense." Betty realized someone had told him about her conversations. Probably he had pressured one of the employees for information. "I'll give you one last chance," Richard continued. "You'll stay quiet in your corner, do your cleaning, and stay out of everyone's business. If I find out you kept up with these conversations, you're out on the spot. Understood? Yes, sir. Good. Now, get out of my office and get back to work. Betty left the room with her heart racing, but also with one certainty. Richard was desperate to keep her away from the other employees. That meant she was on the right track. That night, she finally managed to speak to Michael on the phone. Hi, Mom. Sorry I didn't call sooner. Things have been crazy here. It's okay, son. How's business? Going great. Richard is handling everything there while I focus on expansion. It's a relief to have someone trustworthy managing operations. Betty's heart clenched at the trust in her son's voice. And the employees, how are they? From what Richard tells me, everything's normal. Why do you ask? Just a mother's curiosity. You worked so hard to build this company. That's true, but now it runs itself. Richard manages things very efficiently. Efficient for his own interests, Betty thought. When are you coming back, Michael? Next week. Why? Missing me? I always miss my son. Me too, Mom. I promise I'll visit when I'm back. Betty hung up with a heavy heart. Michael had no idea what was happening in his company, and she was starting to realize she might not gather all the evidence she needed before someone got seriously hurt. The next day, the situation took a drastic turn for the worse. Emma came to work visibly shaken. That morning, Betty saw her quietly crying in the bathroom. What happened, dear? Yesterday he called me into a meeting after hours, said it was to discuss my performance. And what happened? When we got to his office, he tried to kiss me, and when I refused, he said I was being ungrateful and maybe not cut out for the job. Betty felt a wave of anger. Did you document this? I wrote everything down when I got home, but I'm so scared, Mrs. Johnson. I need this job. I just graduated and have student loans to pay. I know, sweetheart, but you can't let him do this to you. What can I do? It's my word against his, and he's the manager. At that moment, Betty made a risky decision. Emma, do you trust me? I do. Then meet me after work at the cafe on the corner. I have something important to tell you. The rest of the day dragged by. Betty was nervous, knowing she was about to break her cover, but she couldn't stand by and watch the abuse any longer. At 6 p.m., she met Emma at the small cafe near the office. Mrs. Johnson, what did you want to tell me? Betty took a deep breath. Emma, what I'm about to say might sound impossible, but I need you to trust me. I'm listening. I'm not just a cleaner. I've been working undercover at the company because I suspected something was wrong there. Emma looked at her in confusion. What do you mean, disguised? I'm Michael's mother, the owner of the company. Emma's eyes widened. I can't believe it. It's true, and everything you and the other girls are going through, I've been documenting to show my son when he returns. But why didn't you just tell him right away? Because he completely trusts Richard and is traveling. I needed concrete proof of what's happening. Emma fell silent for a few minutes, absorbing the information. So you can really do something about this? I can and I will. But I need your help and the help of the other girls. You need to give me detailed accounts of everything that's happened. What if Richard finds out? He won't. And even if he does, he won't be able to do anything. Once Michael knows everything, it'll be the end of Richard. That night, Emma called Ashley and they arranged to meet the next day. Little by little, Betty gathered testimonies from all the employees who had been victims of harassment by Richard. The stories were even worse than she'd imagined. Richard didn't just harass the employees, he also blackmailed them financially. Several of them had accepted his offers out of fear of losing their jobs and not being able to pay their bills. He said if I wasn't more friendly, he could make up reasons to fire me, one of the employees shared, and since I'm paying off my house, I couldn't afford to lose my job. Did the others know what was happening, as Betty asked? We all knew, but we also knew that complaining meant getting fired for sure. He always found some excuse. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the next few days, Betty intensified her evidence gathering. She managed to record several suspicious conversations with Richard, photograph incriminating documents, and collect detailed testimonies from the employees. But Richard was growing more and more suspicious. He started following her through the halls, showing up unexpectedly where she was working, and asking indirect questions about her personal life. "Janitor, where did you live before working here?" he asked one day, out of nowhere. "In the South Bronx, sir." "And where else have you worked?" "In several family homes, sir." Do you have children?" Betty's heart raced. "Why do you ask, sir?" "Just curious. You seem very interested in company matters for a simple janitor." "I just do my job, sir." "Really? Because I get the feeling you've been paying too much attention to other people's conversations." Betty realized he was testing her reactions. "I don't understand, sir." "Oh, you do. And let me tell you something. If I find out you're leaking company information to anyone, you'll be in big trouble." "What information, sir?" "I'm just a janitor." "Exactly. So keep being just a janitor and stay out of where you don't belong." That night, Betty called Michael again. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound worried." "Michael, I need to tell you something very important when you get back." "What kind of thing? Can't we handle it over the phone?" "No, son. It's something we need to discuss in person." "Now you're really worrying me. Did something happen?" "Nothing with my health, if that's what you're thinking. It's about other things." "About what, Mom?" Betty hesitated. She wanted to tell him everything over the phone, but she knew Michael needed to see the evidence to believe it. "It's about your company, Michael." "My company? What about it?" "There are things happening there that you need to know, but I can't talk about it over the phone." "Mom, now you've got me really concerned. Did something happen with Richard?" "A lot has happened, my son. A lot." "All right, I'll come back tomorrow morning. Can we talk in the afternoon?" "Of course. But Michael..." "Yes?" "Be prepared to hear things that will shock you deeply." The next day, Betty arrived at work knowing it would be her last day undercover. Michael would return in the afternoon, and she could finally reveal everything she had discovered. But Richard seemed even more agitated than usual. Throughout the morning, she saw him making several calls and shuffling papers suspiciously. "I need all the reports ready by this afternoon," she heard him tell the accountant. "Michael is coming back today and will want to see everything updated." Betty realized he was preparing false information to show Michael. He was likely hiding or altering evidence of the irregularities he had committed. During lunch, she met with Emma and Ashley one last time. "Everything will be resolved this afternoon," Betty said. "Michael is coming back, and I'll tell him everything." "What if he doesn't believe you?" Ashley asked. "He will. I have proof of everything." "Mrs. Johnson," Emma said, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for us. If it weren't for you, we'd still be suffering in silence. You don't deserve to go through this, my dear. No woman does. And what will happen to Richard? That will depend on Michael. But one thing I can guarantee, he won't keep working at the company." At 2 in the afternoon, Michael arrived at the office. Betty saw him walk down the hallway and felt her heart race. It was the first time she had seen her son in weeks, and she was eager to finally unburden herself. Michael went straight to Richard's office. Through the glass door, Betty could see them talking animatedly. Richard was showing papers and charts, probably the fake reports he had prepared. "Everything's running perfectly," she heard Richard say as Michael left the room. "The numbers are excellent and the team is highly motivated." "Great work, Richard. As always, I can count on you." Betty wanted to scream. Michael was believing everything Richard said, suspecting nothing. By 4 in the afternoon, Michael was getting ready to leave when Betty made an impulsive decision. She couldn't wait until their scheduled meeting. Richard was fooling him again, and she couldn't let it continue. "Excuse me, Mr. Michael," she said, approaching him in the hallway. Michael looked at her, surprised. "Yes. Can I speak with you privately?" "About what?" Richard, who was nearby, immediately stepped closer. "What does this janitor want with you, Michael?" "I don't know." Michael looked at Betty curiously. "What did you want to talk to me about?" Betty took a deep breath. It was now or never. "It's about very serious things happening in your company, son." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stared at her with wide eyes while Richard turned pale. "What did you call me?" Michael asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I called you son because I'm your mother, Michael. Betty Johnson, remember?" Michael stood completely still for a few seconds, processing the information. Then slowly he began to recognize the familiar features in the woman's face before him. "Mom?" he whispered. "Mom, is it really you?" "It's me, my son." "But what? How? Why are you working here as a janitor?" Before Betty could answer, Richard exploded. "What kind of joke is this?" he shouted. "This old woman is obviously lying. Anyone could claim to be your mother." Michael looked at Richard with an expression Betty had never seen before, a mix of confusion, anger, and suspicion. "Richard, this woman really is my mother," Michael said, his voice controlled but tense. "The question is, why was she working here undercover?" Betty looked into her son's eyes and saw he was beginning to understand something was very wrong. "Because I suspected things were happening here that you didn't know about, Michael, and I was right." "What kind of things?" "Things that will make you very disappointed in someone you trusted." Richard tried to interrupt. "Michael, don't believe this nonsense. This woman is obviously trying to pull some kind of scam." "Shut up, Richard!" Michael turned to him with fire in his eyes. "My mother is not a con artist." Then he faced Betty again. "Mom, tell me everything, now." Betty glanced around and saw several employees had drawn closer, drawn by the commotion. Among them were Emma and Ashley, watching her with expressions of support and nervousness. "Michael, it would be better if we talked in private." "No," Michael said, staring straight at Richard. "If something wrong is happening in my company, I want it cleared up in front of everyone." Betty took a deep breath and began to speak. She talked about the suspicions that led her to infiltrate the company, about the systematic harassment Richard had subjected female employees to, about the financial irregularities she'd uncovered, about the unjust firing of competent workers. With every word, Michael's expression grew darker. Richard kept trying to interrupt, denying everything and accusing Betty of making it all up. "This is ridiculous," Richard shouted. "She's lying. Why would a woman her age make up a story like this?" "Because she's not making it up," said a voice behind them. Everyone turned. It was Emma, stepping forward with a stack of papers in her hand. "I have everything documented," she continued. "Dates, times, what he said and did. And I'm not the only one." Ashley moved closer too. "I also have notes on everything, and I can confirm everything Mr. Michael's mother is saying." One by one, other female employees began stepping forward, all confirming the accusations, all sharing their own experiences with Richard. "You're all lying," Richard yelled, desperate. "This is a conspiracy. They planned this together." Michael looked at all the women around him, then at Betty, then at Richard. The fury in his eyes was unmistakable. "Richard," he said, his voice controlled but dangerous, "you're fired. Now." "Michael, you can't believe this. I've worked with you for 6 years. Trust me." "I did trust you," Michael corrected, "and that trust has just been completely destroyed." "But these are just accusations. They have no proof." Betty stepped forward and pulled a recorder from her pocket. "I have all the conversations recorded, Michael, including the ones about the financial irregularities." Michael took the recorder and stared at it for a few seconds. Then he looked at Richard with utter disgust. "Get out of my company, now, and don't you dare set foot here again." "Michael, you're making a mistake." Richard tried one last time. "The mistake was trusting you," Michael replied. "Security." 2 guards appeared and escorted Richard out of the building as he shouted accusations and threats. When they were finally alone, Michael turned to Betty. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, son. How could I have been so blind? How did I not see what was happening?" "Because you trusted. And trust isn't a flaw, Michael. But because of my trust, all these women suffered. Because of my negligence." Betty stepped closer and cupped her son's face. "Now you know, and now you can make things right." Michael looked around at all the employees still present. "I want to apologize to all of you. I'm sorry I let this happen in my company. I'm sorry I didn't see your suffering. Mr. Michael, Emma said, you didn't know, and your mother risked a lot to uncover the truth and help us. Michael turned to Betty. Mum, you disguised yourself as a cleaner and endured weeks of humiliation to protect my company and my employees. To protect you, Michael. This company is your dream. I couldn't let someone destroy everything you built. Michael's eyes filled with tears. I don't deserve a mother like you. Yes, you do, said Betty, also emotional. And you deserve a company you can truly be proud of. In the following days, Michael completely restructured the company's management. He promoted competent employees to leadership roles, implemented strict anti-harassment policies, and audited all finances to uncover the extent of Richard's embezzlement. The financial irregularities were even worse than Betty had suspected. Richard had diverted nearly $500,000 through inflated contracts and shell suppliers. Mom, Michael said a week later as they had dinner at her house, how can I ever thank you for what you did? You don't have to thank me, Michael. Just keep being the honest man you've always been. But you risked so much. What if Richard had found out who you really were? I knew I was taking risks, but I couldn't stand by and watch those girls suffer while you were being deceived. What if I hadn't believed you? Betty smiled. I raised you, Michael. I knew you'd do the right thing once you knew the truth. A few months later, Michael's company had completely transformed. The work environment was respectful and productive, employees were motivated and happy, and financial results had never been better. Emma was promoted to marketing manager and became one of the company's key leaders. Ashley took over customer service coordination. All the employees who had suffered harassment received psychological support and were recognized for their courage in speaking up. Mrs. Johnson, Emma said during the company's year-end party, you changed all of our lives. You changed your own lives when you found the courage to speak the truth, Betty replied. But if it weren't for you, we might never have had that courage. Betty looked around the party. She saw happy employees chatting and laughing freely. She saw her son moving among them, respected and loved by his team. She saw that the company had become what he had always dreamed it would be. You know what? Betty said to Emma. Every hard moment was worth it. Michael walked over to them. What are you two talking about? I was just telling Emma that all the struggle was worth it to get here. Michael hugged his mother. Mom, you're the bravest woman I know. I'm not brave, Michael. I'm just a mother who loves her son. It's the same thing, he said, smiling. The party went on late into the night, with everyone celebrating not just the company's success, but, above all, the environment of respect and dignity they had built together. Later, as they were leaving, Michael asked Betty, Mum, do you regret anything that happened? Betty thought for a moment. I regret not acting sooner. If I'd found out earlier, maybe some people wouldn't have suffered so much. But you did find out, and you did the right thing. I did what any mother would do for her child. No, Mom, you did what a good person does for what's right. Betty smiled. I think I learned that from you, Michael. No, you didn't. You're the one who taught me. As they walked to the car together, Betty reflected on everything that had happened. It had been a difficult time full of humiliation and challenges. But in the end, the truth had prevailed, justice had been served, and the right people had been protected. She thought of all the women who had suffered in silence, all the employees who had been unfairly fired, all the victims of Richard's ambition and cruelty. Now they had a voice, they had support, they had a workplace where they could work with dignity. Michael, she said when they reached the car. Yes, Mom. I'm proud of the man you've become. And I'm proud of the woman who's always been my mother. They hugged in the parking lot, two hearts that had endured a difficult trial, but emerged stronger and more united. Michael's company continued to grow, but now on a solid foundation of respect and integrity. Betty returned to her peaceful retirement, but with the satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference in so many lives. Richard tried to sue the company, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. He ended up having to return the money he had embezzled and never held a leadership position again. The employees who had been victims of harassment became advocates for other women in similar situations, proving that sometimes suffering can be turned into strength to help others. And Betty, whenever someone asked about those difficult months working undercover, always gave the same answer. Sometimes to protect the ones we love, we have to step out of our comfort zone, and there's nothing a mother wouldn't do for her son. The end. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of Betty's courage? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for what's right? Share your thoughts on this touching story in the comments. Your participation means so much to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.